The 56 men gathered in the briefing room at Tockley Royal Thai Air Force Base had trained together for 3.5 months. They had conducted over 170 rehearsals, half of them with live ammunition. They were the most elite fighting force ever assembled, hand-picked Green Berets and Air Force Special Operations pilots. They had practiced until every movement was muscle memory, until they could execute their mission in complete darkness without a single word spoken. But they still did not know what that mission was. For 100 days, they had trained on a full-scale mock-up of something, a compound, a building complex. They learned every measurement, every angle, every corner. They practiced assaulting it from every direction. They rehearsed contingencies for every possible problem, but no one told them what they were attacking or why. Make sure you subscribe to our channel to discover more untold stories from history. At 6 o'clock in the evening on November 20th, 1970, Colonel Arthur Bull Simons finally stood before his men and told them the truth. We are going to rescue 70 American prisoners of war, maybe more, from a camp called Son Tay. This is something American prisoners have a right to expect from their fellow soldiers. The camp is located 23 miles west of Hanoi. The room erupted. Men stood and cheered. Some wept. Every man in that room had volunteered for an unknown mission with no guarantee of survival. Now they knew why. They were going to bring their brothers home. Simons let them celebrate for a moment. Then he raised his hand for silence. His final words would become legend. You are to let nothing interfere with the operation. We're here to rescue prisoners, not take prisoners. And if we walk into a trap, don't dream about walking out of Vietnam unless you've got wings on your feet. It is 100 miles to Laos. I want to keep this force together. We will back up to the Song Khan River, and by Christ, let them come across the goddamn open ground. We'll make them pay for every foot across the son of a bitch. In 18 hours, they would launch the most daring rescue operation in American military history. They would penetrate deep into North Vietnam, 23 miles from Hanoi, and strike at a prison camp guarded by thousands of enemy soldiers. The raid would be executed with precision and courage, but the prisoners would not be there. This is the story of Operation Ivory Coast, the Son Tay Raid, a perfect mission that failed yet changed everything. By 1970, the Vietnam War had become America's nightmare. 58,000 Americans would eventually die in that war. But for the families of prisoners of war, the nightmare had a different quality. Their loved ones were not dead. They were somewhere in North Vietnam, suffering, and no one knew if they would ever come home. Over 450 American prisoners of war were held captive in North Vietnam by 1970. Pilots shot down over the O's north, Special Forces soldiers captured on reconnaissance missions, air crew downed during bombing runs. They were held in camps with names like Hanoi Hilton, Plantation, Zoo, Briar Patch. The conditions were horrific. American POWs faced systematic torture. The North Vietnamese wanted propaganda, confessions, anti-war statements, denunciations of American policy. They used torture to get them. Rope torture that dislocated shoulders, beatings with rubber hoses and bamboo clubs, days and nights in leg stocks, solitary confinement in dark rat-infested cells, starvation rations, watery soup, and moldy bread. Disease without medical treatment. Men died in those camps. Not from combat wounds, but from torture, starvation, and neglect. Their families back home received no information. The North Vietnamese refused to provide prisoner lists. They refused Red Cross access. They refused to follow the Geneva Conventions. Families did not know if their husbands, sons, and fathers were alive or dead. The American government knew about the torture. Intelligence reports detailed the conditions. Escaped prisoners described the horror. Returned prisoners bore the scars, physical and psychological. But the United States was pulling out of Vietnam. Negotiations were underway. The war was winding down. Nothing was being done to rescue the prisoners. In May 1970, Air Force photo analysts at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, were examining aerial reconnaissance photographs of North Vietnam when they saw something extraordinary. At a compound near Son Tay, about 23 miles west of Hanoi, they detected what appeared to be ground-to-air signals. The letters SAR, Search and Rescue, had been laid out on the ground using materials that would show up on aerial photos. The prisoners were signaling. They were asking to be rescued. Analysts examined months of photographs. The camp was small, a walled compound with several buildings inside. The photos showed prisoners in the courtyard, laundry hanging to dry, signs of occupation. Intelligence estimated 55 to 61 American POWs were held there. At least 6 were believed to be in critical condition, near death from torture or disease. The photographs also showed something else: construction, new buildings being erected. The camp was being expanded. More prisoners might be moved there. The window of opportunity was now. The photographs landed on the desk of Brigadier General Donald Blackburn. Donald Blackburn was not a typical general. He was a legend in the special operations community, a man who had lived through experiences that seemed impossible. During World War II, then Captain Blackburn had been trapped in the Philippines when the Japanese invaded. Rather than surrender, he disappeared into the jungle and organized Filipino guerrilla fighters. For 3 years, he fought the Japanese behind their lines, commanding thousands of guerrilla fighters, disrupting Japanese operations, saving Allied lives. He emerged from the jungle in 1945, a hero and a colonel. After the war, Blackburn became one of the fathers of American Special Operations. He helped create the Studies and Observation Group, SOG, the ultra-classified unit that conducted covert operations across Southeast Asia. He understood unconventional warfare. He understood behind-the-lines missions. He understood that sometimes the most audacious plans were the ones that worked. In 1970, Brigadier General Blackburn served as Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities to the Secretary of Defense, a position that reported directly to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. When the Son Tay reconnaissance photos reached him on May 9, 1970, Blackburn immediately understood their significance. American prisoners were signaling for rescue. They were at a relatively isolated camp. The opportunity existed. Blackburn became an advocate, a forceful, determined advocate for a rescue operation. On May 25, 1970, Blackburn met with Air Force Brigadier General James Allen at the Pentagon. They discussed feasibility. Could a rescue be executed? The camp was 23 miles west of Hanoi, deep in enemy territory, surrounded by North Vietnamese troops, surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft batteries, MiG fighters. 12,000 enemy soldiers were stationed within 5 miles of the camp. It would be one of the most dangerous missions ever attempted. But Blackburn argued it could be done. American forces had the helicopters, the pilots, the special operators. They had the intelligence. They had the training capability. It would require perfect planning and perfect execution. But it was possible. General Earl Wheeler, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, authorized a feasibility study. The study was codenamed Polar Circle. It was conducted at the Defense Intelligence Agency's Arlington Hall facility, not the Pentagon, to maintain absolute secrecy. A small group of planners examined every aspect of the operation: flight routes, helicopter capabilities, enemy defenses, weather windows, rescue procedures. The Polar Circle group concluded a rescue was feasible. Difficult, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But feasible. On June 10, 1970, Blackburn briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He recommended the operation proceed. He recommended that he personally lead the mission. The Joint Chiefs approved the operation, but denied Blackburn's request to lead it. At 48 years old, and with his knowledge of classified operations, he was too valuable to risk. Blackburn needed a ground commander, someone who could select and train the assault force, someone who had led men in combat, someone who was fearless, competent, and absolutely trusted by the special operations community. Blackburn knew exactly who he wanted. On July 13, 1970, Blackburn called Colonel Arthur D. Zeitzer Bull Simons. Arthur Simons was 52 years old in July 1970. He had spent 30 years in the Army, 3 wars, countless battles, more close calls than he could count. He should have been a general, but Bull Simons did not fit the career mold. He did not play politics. He did not attend the right schools. He did not cultivate sponsors. He just answered every call because it was the right thing for an American soldier to do. Simons was born in New York City on June 28, 1918. He attended the University of Missouri and graduated with a degree in journalism. In 1941, he was commissioned a second lieutenant in field artillery. When World War II began, Lieutenant Simons shipped out to the Pacific with the 98th Field Artillery Battalion. The 98th was a mule-pack artillery unit, designed to operate in mountainous terrain where vehicles could not go. But the jungles of New Guinea were not mountains. The mules died in the humidity and disease. General Walter Kruger, commander of the 6th Army, decided to convert the unit. The 98th Field Artillery Battalion was dissolved and reformed as the 6th Ranger Battalion. Captain Simons found his calling. As a company commander in the 6th Ranger Battalion, he participated in hazardous landings across the Pacific. He led engineer and Navy teams to demine the Leyte Channel before the invasion of Leyte. He earned a Silver Star for valor. And on January 30th, 1945, Captain Simons participated in one of the war's most famous missions, the raid at Cabanatuan. American forces learned that 500 American and Allied prisoners of war, survivors of the Bataan Death March, were being held at a Japanese prison camp at Cabanatuan in the Philippines. Japanese forces were retreating. The prisoners might be massacred. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci was ordered to rescue them. Mucci led 121 Rangers and Alamo Scouts 30 miles behind Japanese lines. They attacked the camp at night, killed all the guards, and rescued 511 prisoners. It was one of the most successful rescue missions in military history. Captain Arthur Simons was there. He learned lessons he would never forget. After World War II, Simons returned to civilian life briefly. But when the Korean War began, the Army recalled him. He became a Ranger instructor at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. Later assignments took him around the world. In 1958, he joined Special Forces, the Green Berets. In 1961, promoted to lieutenant colonel, Simons commanded Operation White Star, a mobile training team in Laos. For a year, he operated in the bush without losing a single soldier. In 1963, Simons became the first commander of the 8th Special Forces Group in Panama. From 1965 to 1966, he served with the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observation Group, MAIZV-SOG. SOG conducted the most dangerous missions of the war, cross-border operations into Laos and Cambodia, long-range reconnaissance, prisoner snatches, sabotage operations behind enemy lines. Simons thrived there. By 1970, Colonel Simons was back at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, working with the 18th Airborne Corps. He was counting down to retirement. 30 years was enough. Then Donald Blackburn called. "Bull, how would you like to command a rescue mission?" Simons did not hesitate. "When do I start?" Simons understood immediately that this mission required the absolute best. There would be no room for error. Every man had to be physically fit, mentally tough, combat experienced, and highly skilled. This was not a mission for average soldiers. This was a mission for the elite. The call went out. Volunteers wanted for a classified mission. No details provided. High risk, unknown objective, duration unknown. Who would volunteer for a mission when they did not even know what it was? 300 men volunteered. Simons and his officers began selection. They looked for specific criteria: combat experience in Southeast Asia, men who had been there, who understood the enemy, who would not freeze under fire, physical fitness, the mission would be grueling, operational specialty skills, medics, communication specialists, demolitions experts, engineers, and something harder to define, the warrior spirit, men who would fight to the last breath. By August 8, 1970, 15 Army Special Forces soldiers had been selected as the Assault Force Corps. More would join. Eventually, 56 Special Forces soldiers would form the ground element. Their average age was 31 years old. Mature, experienced soldiers. Many were sergeants and staff sergeants, enlisted men with multiple combat tours. The officers were captains and majors who had led men in battle. 3 groups were formed. Blue Boy, 14 men commanded by Captain Richard Meadows. Blue Boy would land inside the prison compound. Their mission? Secure the compound, locate the prisoners, neutralize any guards inside, blow a hole in the south wall, and lead the prisoners to evacuation helicopters. Meadows was 29 years old, a veteran of 3 tours in Vietnam, a man legendary for his calm under fire. Greenleaf. 20 men commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Elliot Bud Sidner. Greenleaf would land outside the prison and secure the eastern approach. They would prevent North Vietnamese reinforcements from entering the compound and provide fire support to Blue Boy. Sidner was 34, a special forces officer with extensive combat experience. Red Wine. 22 men commanded by Colonel Bull Simons himself. Red Wine would land south of the compound and secure the southern approach. They would provide blocking force against enemy reinforcements and support evacuation. Simons led from the front. Always. The Air Force assembled its elements separately. Brigadier General Leroy Manor commanded the overall operation. The Air Force would provide the helicopters and fixed-wing support. The mission required 6 helicopters, 5 HH-53 Super Jolly Green Giants, and 1 HH-3 Jolly Green Giant. The HH-3 would be deliberately crashed inside the compound to deliver Blue Boy. It was a suicide aircraft, flown in, crashed, abandoned. The pilots were volunteers from the Air Force Special Operations community, men who flew combat rescue missions, men who had inserted and extracted special operators under fire, men who could fly helicopters at night, at low altitude, in formation, without lights. The best helicopter pilots in the world. 2 MC-130. Combat Talon aircraft would provide navigation, using forward-looking infrared radar to guide the helicopters. 2 HC-130 tankers would provide aerial refueling over Laos. Supporting aircraft would include A-1 Sky Raiders for close air support and Navy fighters for diversion. 138 Americans would participate directly in the raid. Thousands more would support it, but only 56 would touch the ground at Son Tay. Training began on August 9, 1970 at Eglin Air Force Base in northwest Florida. Absolute secrecy was maintained. The training area was cordoned off. No unauthorized personnel allowed. Security was so tight that even base personnel did not know what was happening. A full-scale mock-up of the Son Tay compound was constructed. Every detail was replicated from aerial photographs. The walls were the correct height. The buildings were the correct size and layout. The courtyard, the guard towers, the tree line, everything was exactly as it would be at Son Tay. The mock-up was built with canvas and wood frames, so it could be assembled each morning and disassembled each evening. No permanent structure meant no satellite surveillance could detect it. The Army also constructed a detailed 5-foot by 5-foot scale model of the compound. The model, codenamed Barbara, was built by the CIA with extraordinary precision. Raiders could study every aspect of the camp. Where the cells were, where the guards slept, where the walls could be breached. The model was so accurate that men could plan their individual movements before they ever stepped into the mock-up. Training followed the crawl, walk, run method. Basic skills first. Weapons familiarization. Each raider carried a CAR-15 carbine, a shortened M16 variant ideal for close quarters combat. They carried M79 grenade launchers, shotguns, M60 machine guns, 48 CAR-15s, 4 M79s, 2 shotguns, 4 M60s, plus 15 Claymore mines, 11 demolition charges, 213 hand grenades. Each raider was issued 58 UHF AM and 34 VHF FM radios. Communications redundancy. If one radio failed, 2 backups existed. If communications broke down, the mission failed. Beyond weapons, raiders trained in medical procedures, how to treat wounded prisoners, how to carry incapacitated prisoners, how to provide emergency care while under fire. Some prisoners might be unable to walk, some might be near death. The raiders had to be prepared to carry every single prisoner out if necessary. By mid-September, training progressed to night operations. The raid would occur at night. Darkness was their friend. Raiders rehearsed under night vision goggles. They rehearsed under no light at all, moving by feel and memory. They rehearsed with smoke-obscuring vision. They rehearsed in rain. They rehearsed in every conceivable condition. On September 28, 1970, the Army and Air Force elements began training together. Helicopters flew missions over the mock-up. Pilots practiced their approach routes. They practiced flying in formation at low altitude. They practiced navigation using the forward-looking infrared. Everything had to be perfect. The assault rehearsals became progressively more realistic. Live fire exercises, actual explosives, helicopters landing while raiders were still firing. Timing was critical. The assault force had to hit the compound, clear all buildings, locate and evacuate prisoners, and depart, all within 27 minutes. After 27 minutes, North Vietnamese reinforcements would arrive. After 27 minutes, the mission became a death sentence. 170 rehearsals were conducted between September and November. Some days, raiders rehearsed the mission 6 times, 3 during daytime, 3 at night. Every rehearsal was filmed. After each run, commanders reviewed the footage. Where were the mistakes? Where were the delays? How could it be done faster, smoother, better? Brigadier General Blackburn observed a rehearsal on October 20th. The ground force arrived 3 to 7 minutes late due to navigation error. Blackburn was very displeased. 3 minutes could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. The next day they ran the mission again, and again, and again, until navigation was perfect. The Air Force pilots flew over 1,050 hours practicing the mission. They flew the exact route they would fly to Son Tay. They practiced formation flying. They practiced aerial refueling at night. They practiced low-altitude flight over mountains. They practiced every emergency contingency. Engine failure, navigation error, enemy fire, lost communications. Every scenario was rehearsed until responses were automatic. By early October, the raiding force was ready. The planning was complete. The intelligence was current. The window of opportunity was opening. Weather patterns over North Vietnam in November would provide clear skies and a partial moon. Enough light to see, but not so much that aircraft would be silhouetted. The moon and weather window occurred between November 18th and November 25th. After that, weather would close in until March. The decision now rested with the President of the United States. On October 8, 1970, General Manner, General Blackburn, and Colonel Simons went to the White House. They briefed Henry Kissinger, President Nixon's national security advisor, and Brigadier General Alexander Haig, Kissinger's military assistant. The briefing was thorough. The plan, the forces, the training, the risks. Manner told Kissinger they had a 95 to 97% assurance of success. The raid would be executed with precision. American casualties would be minimal. The prisoners would be rescued. Kissinger asked about the intelligence. Were the prisoners still at Son Tay? Aerial reconnaissance showed ongoing activity at the camp. Photos from early October showed the compound appeared occupied, but there was concern. Some photos showed weeds growing in areas where prisoners would normally walk. Were the prisoners being punished, kept inside as discipline, or were they gone? The intelligence community debated this. Some analysts believed the prisoners were still there, but being kept inside due to punishment or security concerns. Others noted that North Vietnam was consolidating prisoners into larger camps. Perhaps Son Tay had been closed, but no one had definitive proof. The last reliable intelligence suggested 55 to 61 prisoners remained at Son Tay. The decision came down to risk versus potential reward. If the prisoners were there and the raid succeeded, dozens of Americans would be freed. If the prisoners were gone, the raid would still send a message. The United States had not abandoned its POWs. It would demonstrate that American forces could penetrate deep into North Vietnam and strike at will. Kissinger recommended proceeding. President Nixon agreed, but wanted final confirmation closer to the launch date. On November 18, 1970, the raiding force deployed to Tak Ly Air Base in Thailand. They still did not know the exact target. They knew they were going to Vietnam. They guessed it involved prisoners, but specifics remained classified. That same day, troubling intelligence reached Washington. A reliable source in Hanoi reported that the Son Tay prisoners had been moved. When? Where? The source did not know. Reconnaissance aircraft attempted to photograph the camp on November 18th, but weather prevented it. Another intelligence report suggested the camp was occupied by someone, but whether those occupants were American POWs or North Vietnamese personnel was unknown. Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird was briefed on the situation. The prisoners might not be there. The raid might hit an empty camp. Laird consulted with Blackburn and Lieutenant General Donald Bennett, director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Both recommended proceeding. Even if the camp was empty, the operation was worth the risk. It would. Boost POW morale. It would demonstrate American resolve. It would show the North Vietnamese that nowhere was safe. Laird agreed. He advised President Nixon. Nixon acknowledged the risk, but gave the final approval. It is worth the risk. Proceed. The message was sent to General Manor at Tockley. The raid was authorized. Launch window, November 20th to November 25th. Weather over North Vietnam was forecast to be clear with light winds. It was now or never. On November 20th, 1970, at 6 o'clock in the evening, Colonel Bull Simons finally told his men what they were going to do. The mission plan was extraordinarily complex. Every element had to execute perfectly. Timing was everything. The raiding force would depart from Udorn Air Base in Thailand, just south of the Laotian border. The flight from Udorn to Son Tay was approximately 337 miles one way. The route was circuitous, designed to avoid North Vietnamese radar and air defenses. The helicopters would fly at low altitude, under 100 feet, using terrain masking to avoid detection. 2 MC-130 combat Talon aircraft would lead the formation. These aircraft were equipped with forward-looking infrared radar, FLIR, that allowed them to see terrain in darkness. The combat Talons would navigate, and the helicopters would follow. Over Laos, the helicopters would rendezvous with HC-130 tankers for aerial refueling. Helicopters have limited range. Refueling extended their operational radius. The refueling had to occur at night, at low altitude, in complete radio silence. It required extraordinary skill. After refueling, the formation would cross into North Vietnam from the west. Flight path took them through mountainous terrain to avoid radar stations. Speed, 120 knots. Altitude, under 100 feet. No lights. Radio silence. Formation, flying in complete darkness. The assault would be supported by a massive diversion. The Navy would launch 59 aircraft from the carriers USS Oriskany and USS Ranger. These aircraft would conduct bombing raids near Haiphong and Hanoi, far from Son Tay but close enough to draw North Vietnamese attention. The Navy strikes would create chaos. Air defenses would respond. Radars would focus on the Navy aircraft. The helicopters would slip in undetected. The ground assault had 3 phases. Phase 1, assault on the compound. At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, on November 21st, the lead HH-53 helicopter, call sign Cherry 1, would arrive over Son Tay. Cherry 1 was armed with 2 GAU-2 Gatling guns, 6-barrel rotary cannons capable of firing 4,000 rounds per minute. Cherry 1's mission: suppress enemy fire. The helicopter would make a low pass over the compound, firing at guard towers and barracks buildings. The suppressive fire would last approximately 30 seconds. It would shock and disorient the guards. As Cherry 1 cleared the compound, the HH-3, call sign Banana 1, would make a controlled crash landing inside the prison courtyard. The courtyard was small, about the size of a volleyball court, surrounded by trees over 40 feet tall. The pilot would have to thread the helicopter between the trees. The rotor blades would strike the trees. The helicopter would crash. This was intentional. Banana 1 was a suicide aircraft. Captain Richard Meadows and the 14-man Blue Boy element would exit the crashed helicopter immediately. They would carry bolt cutters, crowbars, axes, chainsaws, whatever was needed to breach cell doors. Meadows would announce via bullhorn, "We are Americans. This is a rescue. Keep your heads down. We are here to get you out." Blue Boy would clear every building, every cell, every room. They would locate the prisoners, remove them from cells, and prepare them for evacuation. Simultaneously, demolitions experts would blow a hole in the south wall of the compound. That hole would become the evacuation route. Phase 2, securing the perimeter. While Blue Boy operated inside the compound, Greenleaf and Redwine would secure the perimeter. Greenleaf, 20 men under Lieutenant Colonel Sidner, would land east of the compound. Their mission: clear buildings in the administrative area, prevent enemy reinforcements from approaching from the east and north, and provide fire support to Blue Boy if needed. Redwine, 22 men under Colonel Simons, would land south of the compound. Their mission? Secure the southern approach, block the road network, prevent enemy reinforcements from the south, and support evacuation operations. The perimeter had to be held for 27 minutes. No enemy forces could reach the compound. If North Vietnamese troops penetrated the perimeter, the mission would devolve into a firefight with the prisoners caught in the middle. Phase 3. Evacuation. After prisoners were located and prepared for evacuation, Blue Boy would lead them through the hole blown in the south wall. HH-53 helicopters would land outside the compound. Prisoners would be loaded, 20 to 30 per helicopter. The loading had to be fast. Every second counted. Once all prisoners were loaded, Greenleaf and Redwine would collapse their perimeters and board the helicopters. The entire force, raiders and prisoners, would lift off and fly back to Thailand. Total time on target, 27 minutes. From the moment Banana 1 crashed inside the compound to the moment the last helicopter departed, 27 minutes. If everything went according to plan, the raiders would be back in Thailand before the North Vietnamese even understood what had happened. The morning of November 20th, 1970, was spent in final preparation. Equipment checks, weapons checks, communications checks, everything inspected, re-inspected, and inspected again. The raiders knew the risks. They were flying into the heart of North Vietnam, 23 miles from Hanoi, surrounded by thousands of enemy troops. If the helicopters were shot down, if the mission failed, if they were captured, they would face the same torture and imprisonment as the men they were trying to rescue. But not one man asked to be removed from the mission. Not one man backed out. They had trained for this. They had volunteered for this. They would see it through. At mid-afternoon, the pilots received weather briefings. Clear skies over North Vietnam, light winds, three-quarter moon, perfect conditions. This was the night. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Colonel Simons addressed the men. He told them the target. He told them what they were going to do. And he told them what was expected. After Simons finished, the men erupted in cheers. Then silence fell. Each man retreated into his own thoughts. Some wrote letters home, just in case. Some prayed. Some checked their equipment one more time. Some simply sat quietly, preparing mentally for what was ahead. At 10 o'clock in the evening, 2200 hours, the helicopters began launching from Udorn. 5 HH-53s, 1 HH-3, 2 MC-130s, 2 HC-130s. The raiding force was airborne. The flight to Son Tay would take 3.5 hours. 3.5 hours flying through the night. Flying without lights. Flying in formation at low altitude. Flying through enemy airspace. 56 men heading toward a prison camp that might be empty. Carrying out a mission that might end in their deaths, but they were American soldiers. And American prisoners of war were waiting. They flew into the darkness. The formation flew west from Udorn at 10 o'clock in the evening. 6 helicopters, 2 combat Talons, 2 tankers. 138 Americans heading into the most heavily defended airspace in the world. The pilots flew without lights. They flew using night vision and instruments. The combat Talons led, their forward-looking infrared radar showing the terrain ahead. The helicopters followed in tight formation. So close that pilots could see the aircraft ahead only as darker shapes against the night sky. Altitude, under 100 feet. Speed, 120 knots. The helicopters skimmed over the jungle canopy. Trees blurred beneath them, mountains rose on either side. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and a helicopter would smash into terrain. But these were the best pilots in the world. They had practiced this flight for months. They knew every turn, every valley, every ridge. Inside the helicopters, the Special Forces soldiers sat in silence. Some tried to sleep, impossible with adrenaline coursing through their veins. Some checked their weapons for the 100th time. Some stared into darkness, thinking about what lay ahead. All of them knew the statistics. 12,000 North Vietnamese troops within 5 miles of Son Tay. Surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft batteries, 100 MiG fighters. If they were detected, If North Vietnamese air defenses engaged, survival was unlikely. Helicopters are not built for combat against jet fighters. They are not armored against anti-aircraft fire. One SA-2 surface-to-air missile could destroy all 6 helicopters. The raiders would die in flames over enemy territory. But the plan relied on surprise and deception. While the raiders flew toward Son Tay from the west, the Navy would create chaos to the east. At approximately 11:30 in the evening, 59 aircraft launched from USS Oriskany and USS Ranger, 2 aircraft carriers operating in the Gulf of Tonkin, F-4 Phantoms, A-7 Corsairs, A-6 Intruders, the largest night carrier strike of the entire Vietnam War. The Navy aircraft screamed toward Haiphong and Hanoi. Bombs fell on military targets. Air defenses lit up. Radars tracked the Navy aircraft. SAM sites fired missiles. MiGs scrambled to intercept. The North Vietnamese air defense network focused on the Navy strike. Every radar, every gun, every missile battery oriented toward the threat from the east. No one was watching the west. No one was watching the mountains. No one saw the 6 helicopters slipping through the darkness. Over Laos, the helicopters rendezvoused with the HC-130 tankers. Aerial refueling at night is always dangerous. Aerial refueling at low altitude in the combat conditions is extraordinarily dangerous. The helicopters had to match speed with the tankers. They had to maneuver their refueling probes into the tanker's drogue basket, a small funnel trailing behind the tanker on a hose, in darkness, without lights, while flying at 100 feet altitude. But the pilots executed perfectly. Each helicopter took on fuel. The process took 20 minutes. Then the formation continued northwest. The helicopters crossed into North Vietnam around 1:30 in the morning on November 21st, 1970. They were now in enemy airspace, flying without authorization, flying without transponders. If detected, they would be engaged immediately, but they remained undetected. The terrain masking worked. The diversion worked. The North Vietnamese had no idea American forces were penetrating toward Hanoi. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the formation approached Son Tay. The pilots could see lights from Hanoi 23 miles to the east, could see villages below, could see the Son Tay compound ahead, a small walled structure near the Song Con River. The moment had arrived. The assault began. At 2:18 in the morning, Cherry 1, the lead HEH-53 gunship, made its attack run over Son Tay compound. The helicopter came in low and fast. The 2 GAU-2 Gatling guns opened fire, 6,000 rounds per minute. Tracer rounds lit up the night. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar like tearing cloth magnified 1,000 times. The Gatling guns raked the guard towers. Rounds shredded wood and flesh. Guard towers disintegrated. Barracks buildings exploded. Any North Vietnamese soldiers in the open were cut down instantly. The suppressive fire lasted 30 seconds, but felt like an eternity. The compound was hammered with hundreds of rounds. Fires started. Buildings collapsed. Smoke and dust filled the air. As Cherry 1 cleared the compound, Banana 1, the HH-3 carrying Blue Boy, came in for landing. The pilot, Major Frederick Donahue, had one chance. The courtyard was tiny. Trees surrounded it. If he missed, if he came in too fast, if he lost control, the helicopter would cartwheel and kill everyone aboard. Donahue threaded the helicopter between the trees. The rotor blades struck branches. Metal screamed. The helicopter shuddered. Donahue fought the controls. The helicopter dropped. The landing gear collapsed on impact. The fuselage slammed into the courtyard. The tail boom broke. The helicopter was destroyed. But the Blue Boy element survived. Captain Richard Meadows kicked open the door. The 14 men of Blue Boy poured out of the wreckage. They moved with purpose. No panic, no hesitation. Every man knew his job. They spread out across the courtyard, weapons raised, searching for targets. Meadows raised a bullhorn. His voice echoed across the compound. "We are Americans. This is a rescue. Keep your heads down. We are here to get you out." Silence. No response, no shouts, no movement. Blue Boy began clearing buildings. Room by room, cell by cell. They blew doors with explosives. They cut locks with bolt cutters. They searched every space, every corner, every shadow, nothing. The cells were empty. The buildings were abandoned. The compound was deserted. Outside the compound, Greenleaf was encountering different problems. Lieutenant Colonel Elliot Sidner's helicopter, carrying the 20-man Greenleaf element, was supposed to land east of the Son Tay compound. The plan called for Greenleaf to secure the administrative area and prevent enemy reinforcements from approaching from the north and east. But the pilot made a navigation error. In darkness, with limited visibility, he mistook another compound 400 meters southwest of Son Tay for the target. The helicopter landed at the wrong location, a facility the raiders would later call the secondary school. As the helicopter touched down, the ramp dropped. Sidner's men rushed out and immediately took fire, massive fire, automatic weapons, dozens of muzzle flashes in the darkness. The secondary school was occupied by a large number of enemy soldiers. How many? Unknown, but far more than intelligence had predicted. Sidnor's men returned fire. M60s opened up. Car-15s chattered. Grenades exploded. The firefight was intense. Close range, high volume, brutal. Sidner called in support from Cherry 1. The HH-53 gunship swooped overhead, Gatling guns blazing. Hundreds of rounds poured into the secondary school. Buildings erupted in flames. The enemy soldiers were not North Vietnamese regulars. Some raiders later reported they appeared to be Chinese or Soviet advisors, indicated by their equipment and uniforms. Others believed they were North Vietnamese special forces or security personnel. To this day, the identity of the soldiers at the secondary school remains classified or unknown. What is certain, Sidnor's men killed a large number of enemy soldiers. Estimates range from 30 to 100 killed. The secondary school was obliterated, but Greenleaf was now in the wrong location, 400 meters from where they were supposed to be. Sidnor made the decision to stay. Moving in darkness under fire would risk friendly fire incidents with other elements. Greenleaf would secure the secondary school and support the primary mission from their current position. Meanwhile, Redwine, Colonel Simons, and 22 men had landed south of the Son Tay compound as planned. They encountered minimal resistance. A few North Vietnamese soldiers were engaged and killed. The southern approach was secured. Simons established a command post and waited for word from Blue Boy. Inside the compound, the search continued, and the truth was becoming undeniable. Captain Meadows and Blue Boy searched every building, every cell block, every structure inside the Son Tay compound. They found evidence of recent occupation, blankets, clothing, cooking utensils, but no prisoners, no guards, no one. The compound was empty. How long had it been empty? Days, weeks, months? The evidence suggested the camp had been abandoned relatively recently, but when exactly, no one could determine. At 2:22 in the morning, 4 minutes after landing, Meadows transmitted the message that shattered the mission. Negative items, I repeat, negative items. Negative items. Code for no prisoners found. The words hit like a physical blow. Simons received the transmission. Manor, circling overhead in a command aircraft, received it. Every man on the mission heard it. 138 Americans had penetrated deep into North Vietnam. They had trained for months. They had executed a perfect assault, and the prisoners were not there. Simons made the immediate decision. Continue the mission. Clear every building thoroughly. Search everywhere. Make absolutely certain no prisoners remained. Do not leave until the compound had been completely searched. If even one American prisoner was there, they would find him. Blue Boy continued the search. They blew open doors that were locked. They checked storage areas. They searched the guard barracks, empty. They searched administrative buildings, empty. They found a small dispensary with medical supplies, but no patients. They found cells designed to hold prisoners, but no prisoners inside. The demolition team blew a hole in the south wall as planned, creating an escape route that would never be used. Claymore mines were placed to cover approaches. Defensive positions established. But there was nothing to defend and no one to evacuate. At 2:27 in the morning, 9 minutes after landing, Simons made the call. Withdraw, mission complete. The assault force had been on the ground for 9 minutes. They had searched the entire compound. They had eliminated any enemy resistance. They had executed the mission perfectly, but they had rescued no one. The evacuation began. The raiders collapsed their perimeters and moved to the landing zones. The HH-53 helicopters landed to pick them up. The process was orderly, disciplined, professional. No panic, no confusion. Every man knew his job. Blue Boy exited through the hole blown in the south wall. They boarded their designated helicopter. Greenleaf, having fought the battle at the secondary school, boarded their helicopters. The secondary school was destroyed, fires burning, bodies scattered across the grounds. Redwine boarded last, ensuring all elements had extracted. Banana 1, the crashed HH-3 inside the compound, was destroyed in place. Thermite grenades incinerated the cockpit and avionics. No sensitive equipment would be left for North Vietnamese intelligence. The tail section remained intact, too heavy to destroy completely, but all classified systems were obliterated. At 2:45 in the morning, the last helicopter lifted off from Son Tay. Total time on target, 27 minutes, exactly as planned. But now came the most dangerous part, getting out of North Vietnam alive. The helicopters formed up and headed west. They flew low, under 100 feet, using the same terrain masking that brought them in. But now, North Vietnamese forces were alerted. Air defense radars were active. SAM sites were tracking. MiG fighters were airborne. The raiders could see surface-to-air missiles launching in the distance. The missiles arced into the sky, bright flames trailing behind them. The missiles were targeting the Navy aircraft, still creating havoc near Hai Phong and Hanoi. None came toward the helicopters. The deception was still working. An F-105 Wild Weasel aircraft, providing defense suppression, was hit by a SAM and went down. The crew ejected. They were captured. That was the only American loss of the night. 2 aircrew captured, later released in 1973. The helicopter formation exited North Vietnamese airspace around 3:30 in the morning. They were safe. They had penetrated the most heavily defended airspace in the world, conducted a precision assault, and extracted without losing a single member of the ground force. 2 casualties. 1 gunshot wound to the leg, 1 broken ankle suffered during the crash landing. Both injuries were minor. At 6:15 in the morning, the helicopters landed at Udorn. The raiders climbed out exhausted, disappointed, but alive. General Manor was there to meet them. So was Colonel Simons. The men stood in. Silence. They had done everything right. They had executed the mission perfectly. But they had rescued no one. The disappointment was crushing. Some men wept, some raged, some simply stood in numb silence. They had risked everything. And for what? An empty compound. But within hours they would learn that their mission, though it failed to rescue prisoners, had accomplished something far more important. The question everyone asked, where were the prisoners? When were they moved? Why? The answer came from intelligence reports and later from the prisoners themselves. The prisoners at Son Tay had been moved on July the 14th, 1970, over 4 months before the raid. The move was not due to intelligence leaks or security concerns. It was due to water. Son Tay's water wells had become contaminated, possibly from flooding of the nearby Song Con River. The camp's water supply was inadequate. The prisoners and guards were suffering. Rather than fix the wells, North Vietnamese authorities decided to close the camp and move the prisoners. 65 American POWs were transported by truck from Son Tay to a camp 15 miles closer to Hanoi. The prisoners called this camp Camp Faith, also known as Dong Hoi. Camp Faith was larger, had better facilities, and could accommodate more prisoners. The Son Tay prisoners joined other POWs already at Camp Faith. North Vietnamese authorities did not announce the move. There was no reason to. They did not know the Americans were planning a rescue. The camp was closed for practical reasons, not security reasons. After the prisoners left, Son Tay compound was repurposed. North Vietnamese forces used it for training or storage. That explained the ongoing activity that intelligence analysts observed in aerial photographs. The camp appeared occupied because it was occupied, just not by American POWs. But here is the critical intelligence failure. The information that prisoners had been moved existed but never reached the raid planners. On November 19th, 2 days before the raid, a coded message from a North Vietnamese intelligence source reached American intelligence. The message listed POW camps in North Vietnam and the number of prisoners at each. Son Tay was listed as having 0 prisoners. This information never reached General Manor or Colonel Simons. Why? Intelligence compartmentalization. Different agencies collected different information. Security procedures prevented information sharing. The CIA knew something. The Defense Intelligence Agency knew something else. Air Force intelligence had different information. No one had the complete picture. The planners responsible for the raid were isolated from outside intelligence to maintain operational security. They received information through specific channels. The coded message from November 19th went through different channels. By the time anyone recognized its significance, the raid had already launched. It was not intentional. No one deliberately withheld information. But the compartmentalization of intelligence, designed to protect security, prevented critical information from reaching the people who needed it most. After the raid, President Nixon ordered a comprehensive review of the intelligence community. That review led to major reforms, better information sharing, improved coordination, the creation of more integrated intelligence structures. The failure at Son Tay led directly to improvements that would benefit future operations. But that was cold comfort to the men who had risked their lives for an empty compound. 3 days after the Son Tay raid, North Vietnamese authorities began moving American POWs from camps throughout North Vietnam into larger centralized facilities in Hanoi. Camp Faith was closed, Plantation was closed, Zoo was closed, Briar Patch was closed. All American prisoners were consolidated into a few large camps, primarily Hanoi Hilton and Camp Unity. The Son Tay raid had terrified the North Vietnamese. An American force had penetrated to within 23 miles of Hanoi, deep inside North Vietnam, and attacked a prison camp. If they could do it once, they could do it again. No camp outside Hanoi was safe. Moving prisoners to Hanoi placed them under the protection of the capital's air defense network. Hundreds of anti-aircraft guns, dozens of SAM sites, MiG fighters on alert. No American rescue force could penetrate Hanoi's defenses. The prisoners would be safe from rescue, but also safe from being left in isolated, poorly defended camps where they might be killed. For American POWs, the consolidation was a blessing. For years, prisoners had been held in isolation, solitary confinement, 1 man per cell, no contact with other Americans. The isolation was psychological torture. Men went months, even years, without speaking to another human being except their interrogators and guards. After Son Tay, prisoners were grouped together, 10 men per cell, 20 men per cell, sometimes more. They could talk, they could share information, they could support each other. For men who had been alone for years, the companionship was invaluable. Treatment also improved. The North Vietnamese, embarrassed by the raid, wanted to avoid international criticism. They improved food, they reduced torture, they allowed more mail, they provided better medical care. It was not humane treatment, it was still imprisonment, still brutal, but it was better than before. POWs later reported that learning about the Son Tay raid was one of the greatest morale boosts of their captivity. They learned that the U.S. military had not forgotten them, that American forces had come for them, that the government was trying to bring them home. Even though the raid failed, the effort mattered. Navy Commander James Stockdale, the senior POW in North Vietnam, later said, "The raid on Son Tay was a failure in terms of its immediate objective, but it was a tremendous success in terms of its impact on us. It told us our country had not forgotten us. It told us they were trying to get us out. It gave us hope." Air Force Major John Heilig, who had been at Son Tay until July and was moved to Camp Faith, watched the raid unfold from his new prison. He saw the helicopters. He heard the explosions. He knew immediately what it was. He and his fellow prisoners cheered, even though they knew they were not being rescued. The fact that someone tried meant everything. In 1973, all American POWs were released as part of the Paris Peace Accords ending American involvement in Vietnam. They came home. They reunited with families, they rebuilt their lives, and many of them credited the Son Tay raid with giving them the strength to survive the final years of captivity. On November 23, 1970, 2 days after the raid, the Son Tay raiders returned to the United States. They flew to Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington, D.C. President Richard Nixon wanted to meet them. The White House ceremony was held on November 24th. Nixon presented decorations. 6 men received the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. Colonel Simons, Lieutenant Colonel Sidner, Captain Meadows, Master Sergeant Thomas Kemmer, Sergeant First Class Tyrone Adderley, Staff Sergeant Thomas Powell. 23 helicopter crew members received the Silver Star. 5 received the Air Force Cross. Others received Bronze Stars and Army Commendation Medals. Every member of the raiding force was recognized. Nixon praised the raiders. This operation was a success in every way except one. The prisoners were not where intelligence had indicated, but the mission was executed brilliantly. The training, the courage, the professionalism demonstrated by these men represents the finest traditions of American military service. The media coverage was extensive but mixed. Some praised the raid as a demonstration of American resolve. Others criticized it as a reckless failure. Critics pointed out that the prisoners were not there, that intelligence had failed, that the raid accomplished nothing. They called it an embarrassment. The raiders did not respond to criticism. They had done their duty. They had executed the mission. Whether it succeeded or failed was not for them to judge. They were soldiers. They answered the call. But privately, the disappointment lingered. These were men who had devoted months of their lives to rescuing fellow Americans. They had risked everything, and they had come away with nothing. That knowledge hurt. Some raiders struggled with it for years. Captain Richard Meadows, the Blue Boy commander, later became one of the founding members of Delta Force, the Army's premier counterterrorism unit. He participated in the planning for the Iran hostage rescue attempt in 1980. He remained in special operations until his retirement. He died in 1995 and was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His gravestone reads, "Soldier, a patriot and good friend." Colonel Bull Simons retired from the Army on July 31st, 1971. He moved to a small farm in Red Bay, Florida, with his wife Lucille. He raised pigs, he did gunsmithing. He tried to live a quiet life. But in 1978, he was called back to action one more time. In December 1978, the Iranian Revolution was gaining momentum. The Shah of Iran, a U.S. ally, was losing control. Anti-American sentiment was rising. Tehran was becoming dangerous for Americans. 2 employees of Electronic Data Systems, a Texas-based company run by billionaire H. Ross Perot, were arrested in Iran on false charges. Paul Chiapparone and Bill Gaylord were thrown in prison. The Iranian government demanded millions of dollars in ransom. Perot refused to pay. The U.S. State Department could not help. The situation was deteriorating. Perot remembered the Son Tay Raid. He remembered Bull Simons. He contacted Simons in Florida and asked for help. Simons was 60 years old, retired, living peacefully. He could have said no, but Simons never said no when someone needed help. He agreed to organize a rescue. Perot assembled a team of EDS employees, all former military, though none had special operations experience. Simons trained them. He planned the mission. In February 1979, the team infiltrated into Tehran. They broke Chiapparone and Gaylord out of prison during the chaos of the revolution. They fled across the mountains into Turkey and returned to the United States. It was a perfect operation. No one killed, no shots fired, the prisoners freed. Simons had done it again. The story was chronicled in Ken Follett's book On Wings of Eagles, and later adapted into a television movie starring Burt Lancaster as Simons. Perot never forgot what Simons did. The two became close friends. But Simons did not enjoy his success for long. On May 21st, 1979, just 3 months after returning from Iran, Bull Simons suffered a massive heart attack. He died at age 60, never making general, never receiving the recognition he deserved during his lifetime. He was buried in Barrancas National Cemetery in Pensacola, Florida. A simple grave, a simple headstone, no fanfare, just as Simons would have wanted. But the Special Operations community never forgot. Today, the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center presents an annual Bull Simons Award to an outstanding special operator. A statue of Simons stands at Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, outside the Special Forces Museum. The Arthur D. Simons Center for the Study of Interagency Cooperation at Fort Leavenworth bears his name. Bull Simons was a warrior. He answered every call. He never quit. He never complained. He did his duty. That was his legacy. The Son Tay Raid is often called a successful failure. It failed to rescue prisoners, but it succeeded in demonstrating that American Special Operations Forces could conduct missions deep in denied territory with precision and professionalism. More importantly, the Son Tay Raid exposed critical deficiencies in U.S. Special Operations capabilities. Those deficiencies would lead to sweeping reforms. The first deficiency: inadequate joint operations capability. The Son Tay Raid involved Army, Air Force, and Navy elements. Coordination was difficult. Command structures were unclear. Different services had different procedures, different radio frequencies, different planning methods. The mission succeeded because of exceptional individuals, not because of efficient joint operation structure. The second deficiency: intelligence failures. The compartmentalization that prevented critical information from reaching raid planners was systemic. Intelligence agencies did not share information effectively. Operational planners were isolated from intelligence analysts. The system failed. The third deficiency: lack of standing special operations units. The Son Tay Raiders were assembled ad hoc. Volunteers pulled from various units, trained for a specific mission, then returned to their parent units. There was no dedicated counterterrorism or hostage rescue force. Every mission required starting from scratch. In 1980, another hostage crisis demonstrated these deficiencies catastrophically. Iranian militants seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 52 American hostages. President Jimmy Carter authorized a rescue mission, Operation Eagle Claw. On April 24, 1980, Delta Force, a newly created special operations unit, attempted to rescue the hostages. The mission was a disaster. 8 Americans died when a helicopter collided with a C-130 tanker aircraft in the Iranian desert. The mission was aborted. The hostages remained captive for another 264 days. Eagle Claw's failure galvanized reform. Congress and the Pentagon recognized that special operations needed better organization, better resources, better support. In 1987, Congress passed the Nunn-Cohen Amendment to the Goldwater-Nichols Act. This legislation created the United States Special Operations Command, USSOCOM, a unified command responsible for all special operations forces. USSOCOM provided dedicated funding, dedicated resources, dedicated command structure. Special operations forces became a priority. Training improved, equipment improved, capabilities expanded. The reforms that began after Son Tay and accelerated after Eagle Claw transformed American special operations. Today, USSOCOM comprises over 70,000 personnel. It includes Army Special Forces, Rangers, Delta Force, Navy SEALs, Air Force Special Tactics, and Marine Special Operations. These forces conduct missions around the world: counterterrorism, direct action, special reconnaissance, unconventional warfare. They are the most capable special operations forces in history, and it all traces back, in part, to 56 men who flew into North Vietnam one night in November 1970 to rescue American prisoners who were not there. The Son Tay Raid taught military planners critical lessons that remain relevant today. Lesson 1. Intelligence is perishable. Intelligence that is accurate today may be obsolete tomorrow. The Son Tay prisoners were at the camp in May when planning began. They were gone by July. The intelligence that drove the entire operation was months out of date by the time the raid launched. Modern intelligence systems emphasize real-time collection, rapid dissemination, and continuous updates. Commanders must understand that intelligence ages like milk, not wine. Lesson 2. Training matters more than equipment. The Son Tay Raiders flew old helicopters. They carried standard weapons. They did not have advanced technology. What they had was extraordinary training, 170 rehearsals, months of preparation, every contingency planned. That training allowed them to execute a complex mission in the most dangerous environment imaginable with only 2 minor casualties. Superior training overcomes equipment deficiencies. Lesson 3. Boldness can succeed where caution fails. The Son Tay Raid was audacious. Critics said it was too risky, too dangerous. The odds of success were low, but boldness and surprise provided advantages that caution could not. The North Vietnamese never expected American forces to strike so deep inside their territory. That surprise allowed the raiders to penetrate, assault, and extract before effective enemy response. Sometimes the boldest plan is the best plan. Lesson 4. Mission failure does not equal operational failure. The Son Tay Raid failed to rescue prisoners, but it achieved other objectives. It boosted POW morale. It improved POW treatment. It demonstrated American resolve. It showed the North Vietnamese that nowhere was safe. Those outcomes mattered. Mission success is not always measured by the primary objective. Sometimes secondary effects are equally important. Lesson 5. The importance of jointness. The Son Tay Raid was one of the first operations conducted under direct Joint Chiefs of Staff control. It demonstrated both the value and the challenges of joint operations. Army and Air Force elements worked together seamlessly because exceptional leaders made it work, not because the system facilitated it. That experience drove reforms that created true joint operational capability. Lesson 6. Never leave anyone behind. The most important lesson of Son Tay is not tactical or operational. It is moral. American prisoners of war had been captured, tortured, abandoned. The Son Tay Raid told them, "You are not forgotten. We will come for you." That message resonated not just with POWs in Vietnam, but with every American service member since. The military takes care of its own. No one is left behind. That principle, demonstrated at Son Tay, remains sacrosanct. 54 years have passed since the Son Tay Raid. All the raiders are now deceased or in their 90s. Bull Simons died in 1979. Richard Meadows died in 1995. Elliot Sidner died in 2012. The veterans of that mission are passing into history. But the legacy endures. The Son Tay Raid demonstrated that American Special Operations Forces could conduct missions that conventional wisdom said were impossible. It showed that with proper training, proper planning, and proper leadership, small teams of dedicated professionals could achieve extraordinary results. The raid also demonstrated something more important: American values. The prisoners at Son Tay were not high-value targets. They were not strategic assets. They were soldiers and airmen who had been captured doing their duty. Rescuing them offered no military advantage, but the United States sent a rescue force anyway because it was the right thing to do. Because American prisoners of war deserve to be rescued. Because we do not abandon our people. That is the true meaning of the Son Tay Raid. Not the tactical execution, though it was brilliant. Not the intelligence failure, though it was real. The meaning is that America values its service members enough to risk lives rescuing them, even when the odds are against success. Today, Special Operations Forces conduct missions around the world. When they plan operations, they study Son Tay. When they train for hostage rescue, they learn from Son Tay. When they face impossible odds, they remember Son Tay. And when they prepare to launch into danger, they remember Colonel Bull Simons' final words. This is something American prisoners have a right to expect from their fellow soldiers. Every American service member has that right. The right to know that if captured, if imprisoned, if held behind enemy lines, someone will come, someone will try, someone will risk everything to bring them home. That is the promise of Son Tay. That is the legacy of 56 raiders who flew into the heart of North Vietnam one November night and came away empty-handed but not empty-hearted. The prisoners were not there. But the mission still mattered, the effort still counted, the courage still inspires. On November 21st, 1970, 56 American soldiers did their duty. They volunteered for a mission that could have killed them. They trained until they were perfect. They flew into enemy territory without hesitation. They assaulted a prison camp guarded by thousands. They executed the mission flawlessly. And when they discovered the prisoners were gone, they withdrew professionally, got everyone out alive, and accepted the disappointment with dignity. That is what warriors do. That is what Americans do. That is the legacy of the Son Tay Raid. The prisoners at Son Tay were moved 4 months before the raid, but the men who came for them were not too late. They were exactly on time to demonstrate that American prisoners are not forgotten, on time to show that someone always comes, on time to remind the world that Americans leave no one behind. The Son Tay Raid was not a failure. It was a promise kept, and that promise endures today, tomorrow, and forever.